Test check 1 2, test check 1 2, test check 1 2 1 2, testing, checking. Haven't used this mic in a little bit, so I'm just gonna keep checking it, testing it, checking and testing, waiting. Okay, I'm gonna check the sound real quick. Give me a second, guys. Yeah, my connection looks like it's struggling. Struggling. I'll test the audio here again shortly whenever it pops up. Working on Mark 10, 1 to 12, teaching on divorce, but it almost more than that is a teaching on how we should apply Old Testament law, which is interesting. And then some discussion on the topic of divorce and adultery. So just going through what New Testament use of the Old Testament says. Some interesting stuff in this one. Apart from the possible addition of the variant au2, even with the textual uncertainty of kai proskalethestai, all three Genesis texts are identical in the Septuagint, which apart from the addition of hoidoi Masoretic. So let's look, since they're talking about textual variants, let's pull up comfort. Let's see, Mark 10:1. Mostly irrelevant, it seems. Second variant indicates Jesus traveled to the other side, a typical route for Jews wishing to avoid Samaria. Few witnesses omit Pharisee from the text. I think I'm going to drop off and reboot, guys. I think I'm pushing too hard of a bit rate for my internet right now. Give me a sec, I'm just going to restart. Wonder if I can do it mid-broadcast. Looks like I can. I dropped it to 2,000. I don't know if that'll help or not. Let's see if we keep dropping frames. The other thing I can do is, I can try to boost my performance, max it out. Let's see if that helps at all. Yeah, I got my thermals turned way down. Let's max out the thermals and see if that helps. It's still downloading updates, so might be gross for a bit, guys. Be patient with me. I can't even check to see if the audio is coming through well. Mark 10:2, Pharisee omitted. Not a big deal. Doesn't look like many manuscripts use that. Mark 10:6, made them male and female. God made male and female. God made them male and female. The two variants make the subject explicit by saying it was God who made the male. All English variants except NET have done likewise. I would think that he made them male and female would be more likely. Guess it's just a clarification, but for this cause a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. For this cause a man will leave his father and mother. So eliminating and be joined to his wife. So this is, I think, the first relevant one. Oops. There we go. Mark 10:7. And be joined to his wife. NIV includes that, right? And be united to his wife. Yeah, right there. It is possible that the clause and will be joined to his wife was accidentally admitted by scribes whose eyes passed from the chi that begins this clause to the chi that begins the next verse. It seems unlikely that this could have happened in several manuscripts, especially Sinaiticus and Beze. Further, man, am I still dropping frames like mad? I sure hope not. Let's see if I can't boost my performance real quick. Still upgrading. Not good. Well, all I can do is the best I can do. Right now, let's wait for that to upgrade. It is more likely the clause was added by scribes to conform Mark to either Matthew or Genesis. The two forms of the text also make it suspect as an addition. Without this clause, the quotation reads, "That is why a man leaves his father or mother, and the two will become one flesh." Admittedly, this is a harder reading because it lacks the transitional clause that brings the man and the woman. For this reason, not too many translators are willing to follow the shorter text. Nonetheless, it was characteristic of New Testament writers not to quote Old Testament scriptures in their entirety because they were operating according to memory or intended eclecticism. Mark may have written the shorter rendition. Mark may have written the shorter rendition that was later filled in by Matthew in his Gospel and scribes working in Mark. The same kind of textual phenomenon has occurred in Ephesians 5:31, where Genesis 2:24 is cited. Yeah, I think it's likely the shorter reading. Without looking at Sinaiticus myself. Yeah, I'll go with that. If she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. If a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. If she separates from her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. The meaning is the same. This is the only relevant one. Yeah, I don't need to read into that one. Okay, cool. Yeah, the internet here at the church is just not nearly as good as at my house, so that's probably why we're getting issues. Okay, so we've got several big questions. Interpretation of Old Testament, because Jesus calls that into question. The topic of divorce itself is relevant. And adultery as it relates to divorce. Man, this is going to be sensitive. So let's see what New Testament use of Old Testament has to say about it. Deuteronomy 2:1-4 in context. Our passage belongs to a series of miscellaneous civil and domestic regulations. That's relevant. It is concerned not with divorce laws per se, which the Torah nowhere fully explicates but rather assumes, but instead with supplementary prohibition against the man remarrying a former wife. There's nothing to suggest that the grounds of the divorce are improper, since no financial restitution is involved. The reason for the law is not stated, but might reflect a concern that if this practice were permitted, adultery might begin to appear less wicked. Okay. Making progress. The only Old Testament instance where this principle is clearly invoked is Jeremiah 3:1, but here it is the husband, Yahweh, who is being abused. In view of Deuteronomy 24:1-4, Yahweh asks, how is it that his adulterous wife Israel, incredibly taking his forgiving love for granted and yet abandoning him for prolific fornication, could possibly be restored? Beyond this, two separate issues emerge. The implicit and broader matters concerns divorce in general, the validity of which Deuteronomy 24 assumes. This is in keeping with Malachi. God's hatred is not directed to divorce per se, but unfaithfulness to one's marriage vows. Dead Sea Scrolls are less clear, but also seem to allow divorce. And the rabbis are required whether the divorce can have conditions. Generally regarded as undesirable, but sometimes necessary. The Hillelite, any matter divorce very quickly became the most common procedure. Second and more immediate issue concerns the ground for divorce based on 24:1's indecent thing. No-fault divorces were the center of contention, which is kind of interesting because that's the situation we find ourselves in as well. Very interesting. And then, of course, Jesus' quote to them, coming on the climactic sixth day of creation, special status, male and female. The importance of genderedness. That might come down here. Let me restart my chat real quick. Wondering if it's bugging out like it's done before. In between these two texts is passage to which 224 belongs, more focused, and let's see. Yeah, this download's taking forever, guys. I'm sorry if this stream never goes. Apologies. It is what it is, though. Sometimes you drop frames. I should shut off Steam, though. That'd be a good idea. This is not merely descriptive, but rather in the context of the Torah constitutes a divine decree. Monogamous marriage. No surprise to us. According to Yabam, a man who has no wife is incomplete. To lack a wife is to be without goodness, joy, blessing, atonement, well-being, or a full life, and reduces the representation of the divine image. Issues of inheritance, adultery, improper marriages. Interesting. Very interesting. I'm just going to check the audio real quick since it looks like I'm finally getting some frames to go here. Give me a sec, guys. Okay. Actually looks like it's going at this point. Nice. Good to see. Good to see. So hopefully you guys that's coming through for you guys as well. Use of these verses in Mark. This is where it's going to get big. I got 2 more sections, but this is important. One difficulty here is that Mark does not explain. Oops, I hit a button here. One difficulty here is that Mark does not explain the potential dilemma the Pharisees' test presupposed. It is unlikely that they knew Jesus' view, even when his closest followers did not. The Pharisees might be attempting to ensnare him. Since John got beheaded. Okay, so they assumed divorce is okay. The intent being this, right here. Is it lawful to divorce for any matter? That's what they want to know. Both texts involve idolatry, with Jeremiah 4 particularly addressed to Israel's prolific adulteries. For Jesus, the problem underlying people's divorcing one another was their idolatrous adultery against God. Then turning to the two verses that played a central role in arguments for monogamous marriage, in which point Jesus underlines by emphasizing this gloss, he reads them in an entirely unexpected way. Debate on number of children. Ooh, here we go, right here. Check this out. In other words, a proper understanding of God's prior intention in Genesis 1-2 should have alerted them to the fact that the later Deuteronomy 24 was not about what constituted a pious divorce, but rather about regulating the unacceptable problem that occasioned it in the first place. Jesus' position. And that kid's going nuts out there. I don't know if you guys can hear him, probably not. Full-blown meltdowns are what I have to look forward to as a father. It just happens. Jesus' private explanation to his disciples reflects the expected outcome in a tradition that regards marriage as the preferred estate. First, if Jesus' final declaration is taken to mean no divorce under any circumstances, then he is at odds with not just Moses, but with God, who himself was obliged to divorce Israel at one point. The fact that Jesus says nothing about no-fault divorces is probably best understood as an acceptance of those grounds as outlined in Exodus 21. Following Yahweh's example, divorce even in these situations is not mandatory, and reconciliation and forgiveness are much preferred. Man, how am I going to teach on this topic? This one's going to be rough, guys. It's going to be rough. Several unifying themes point to Mark's intentional placement of this account. First, no relationship is more susceptible to causing either oneself or a little one to stumble than marriage. For Jesus' cross-bearing disciples, the goal was no longer a righteous divorce, but rather the imitation of God's grace. Given Mark's interest in Malachi's threat and John as Elijah, it might be in view of the breach of marriage vows that the Pharisees' understanding of Deuteronomy 24 aided and abetted that he has included Jesus' criticisms as a further indictment on the very issue for which John was imprisoned. From a new Exodus perspective, Christologically, Jesus, the new Mosaic, Isaianic servant teacher, continues to instruct his reconstituted Israel in the way of the new Torah, focusing on self-renouncing, humble dependence on God. So it's almost like divorce is the Old Testament way of doing things. I don't know though, because God divorces Israel when we enter in the New Testament. I'll just put it for now. No, that's entirely not true, because also you have Hosea, other verses. Yeah, so that's not as clear as one would hope. Not as clear as one would hope. Well, I don't know if that clarified or not. So that's helpful that he's talking about no-fault divorce, but I'm obviously going to have to get more info. This one's not very clear. Not afraid to admit I need help on this one, guys. In ancient Judaism, marriage was not regarded as a union of equals for the mutual benefit of both husband and wife, but rather as an institution whose chief purpose was the establishment and continuance of the family, whose chief enemy was childlessness. Mark's placement of Jesus' teaching on marriage at the beginning of this section signals the importance of the marital union in the kingdom of God. I think the fact that both commit adultery is relevant. Jesus then left that place, went to that place is first to Galilee, probably Capernaum. He refers to the textual variant that won't be relevant for preaching. Alienware almost done, and then I can actually increase the Can actually increase the power of my computer on this one. Yeah, none of this is super relevant. Yeah, I've already hit on these themes, that Jesus is for both Jews and Gentiles. Mark's record of the question of the Pharisees is surprising, since as was well known, Jewish law permitted divorce. This is relevant. It's a busy one out there, guys. Got all our children's ministry stuff going on right now. But the failure of either passage to forbid divorce and remarriage suggests that the latter were at least allowed. Given the universal acceptance, it seems reasonable to conclude that for any matter is implied in the question of the Pharisees to Jesus. Again. Yeah, see, this is the second one that's essentially stating this. The sense of the question asked of Jesus seems to have been, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any grounds other than adultery? Same thing. Mark informs us the motive of the question of the Pharisees was not a simple inquiry, it was a test. Man, great commentary. Probably should have known it'd be great. Pillar is always good. Yes. Since Alienware is upgrading. Oh, it finally upgraded. Now let's turn the thermals to full speed. Boom. Now we can get a lot more. I'll save that for later. I just want to get my thermals to full speed so that I can maybe get some more frames for you guys. The Pharisees reflect the view that marriage is a disposable contractual arrangement. Twice they inquire about possible grounds of its dissolution. Their attitude reminds us of a person who has been granted a bank loan and then asks under what conditions he may be absolved from repaying it. The starting point in Jewish discussions of divorce was Deuteronomy 24. A second marriage defiled a man's first wife. As originally intended, Deuteronomy 24 did not encourage divorce, but rather attempted to preserve an equitable ruling in the unfortunate event of divorce. Okay. It is, in other words, a text of concession, not a text of intention. The exceptional measures necessary when a marriage fails are of no help in discovering. It's funny, Jesus doesn't even want to argue about the exceptions. He doesn't even want to argue about them. He just wants to tell them what to do. This is great. Jesus applies the analogy of Scripture. He goes behind the authority of the Torah and appeals to a prior and more fundamental authority of creation. This is interesting. This essentially says we can't do the same. This pronouncement, Jesus again presumes a divine authority resident in himself. He does not deduce a conclusion from Scripture, but declares the will of God as set forth in a creation text over against a legal text. I don't know if I agree with that. think Jesus intends us to understand what the scriptures say at this point and follow it. Don't get me wrong, I know he's divine and he has ultimate authority and power and we do whatever he says, but I don't think the intention is, well, this is me saying what to do, but you would never know how to do this yourself. I don't think that's his intention. Could be wrong. Twice they ask for exceptions, twice he tells them what to positively do. So that's the big picture, actually. The principle behind all of this. Look for the positive commands and live them to the fullest. Not looking for exceptions and loopholes. That is in here. This is a big deal in here. That one definitely needs to be addressed. Sorry, my cable had something on it. Nearly 1/6 of the Mishnah is devoted to the subject of women, but the texts on women have little to say about women in their own right. They're chiefly concerned rather with female transitions in life from the allegiance of father to husband or husband to son. Jesus' teaching on marriage, to the contrary, is predicated on a different estimate of women. This is relevant. High view of women. High view of women promoted by Jesus, not patriarchy. That's important. Appealing further to supplementary creation text from Genesis 2:24, Jesus declares that a husband's obligation to his wife surpasses his obligation to his own parents. In the Torah, the commandment to honor one's parents is one of the 10 commandments of God, but the effect of verse 7 is to declare that a husband's allegiance to his wife surpasses his allegiance to father and mother. The greatest difference between Jesus and the rabbis, however, is this. By giving a husband principal control over his wife, the Jewish divorce policy made the man the lord of the marital relationship. According to Jesus, however, it is neither man nor woman who controls marriage, but rather God, who is lord of the marriage. What God has joined together, let no man separate. That whole thing needs to be bolded. The discourse shifts to a house, which typically in Mark signifies further explanation. Okay, they go home, they ask him more details. The sin of adultery occurs as a result of remarriage rather than as a result of divorce. This implication is somewhat misleading. However, for in Jewish law, remarriage was only valid on the grounds of divorce. The divorce was invalid, the individual is still married, and the second marriage becomes adulterous. Thus, the thrust of Jesus' teaching is not simply to proscribe remarriage after divorce, but to deny the Pharisees' presumption for divorce in general. (1011) is a startling declaration, for in rabbinic understanding, a husband's adultery was reckoned against a woman's father or husband, not against the woman herself. Jesus' declaration, however, imputes to women the status of sovereign moral agents. Recently published 2nd century Jewish divorce certificate confirms women did possess the right of divorce in Judaism. Mark 10, 1-12 is a blueprint for an entirely new norm of marriage. Although it is possible the exception of adultery is implied, verses 11-12, I do not believe we can say for certain that it is. Whether or not Jesus allowed for divorce on the basis human failure does not alter that purpose. The question of whether God forgives those who fail in there. So this whole paragraph's good. This whole final paragraph. The question in our day of impermanent commitments and casual divorce is whether we as Christians will hear the unique call of Christ to discipleship in marriage. In marriage, as in other areas to which the call of Christ applies, will we seek relief in what is permitted, or commit ourselves to what is intended by God and commanded by Christ? Will we fall away in trouble and difficulty, or follow Jesus in the costly journey of discipleship, even in marriage? This is a discipleship issue. $328. Wow, very, very strong commentary there. I have a feeling this is going to be a tough one to really focus on. They say the same thing. I don't know if I agree with this. I'll keep writing it down, I guess, until I believe. Mark, following Jesus, is not interested in speculating what divorce may be a less worse situation than a bad marriage. There's no such thing as a good divorce. Every divorce witnesses a failure of God's purpose in marriage. I like that it had the summary. I'm just going with that. I just got so many commentaries, I don't have time to read them all in super depth, you know? It's good to have that many commentaries, but you need to be able to get the meat from all of them as quickly as possible. So is the text about divorce, or is it about living to God's standards. Guess it can be both. Jesus cut across the casuistry of the Jewish legal tradition. In asking what Moses commanded, it is evident that Jesus was calling for positive instruction. The Mosaic provision was made for the contingency of divorce, but it did not in itself determine whether the contingency was right or wrong. Old Testament law not always meant to determine right and wrong, but rather permissible and, well, Jesus' forceful retort is a denunciation of human sinfulness, which serves to clarify the intention of the Mosaic provision. Deuteronomy 24, divorce is tolerated, but not authorized or sanctioned. Although not as, I don't know how to put this, although not as, maybe unique is the right word, as the other, no, unique's right, not right. Although not as insightful and thoughtful as the other two commentaries, this commentary is much more clear, which I like. They just state it clearly. The other ones I felt like I had to dig through to find the truth. This one is just straightforward. The appeal to the creation narrative lifts the discussion to a higher plane by relating it to the purpose of God with regard to marriage. The significant aspect of Jesus' teaching at this point is that the interdiction of divorce is subservient to the proclamation of the unity of the marriage, expressing a reaction against the frequently low esteem of women, even in Judaism. God intended that the purpose of marriage should be the unity, and the obligations of marriage should be taken seriously. A decisive no to divorce provides the required safeguard against human selfishness, which always threatens to destroy marriage. Jesus does not envisage marriage as it is at times, but as it can be and should be. A call to fidelity, peace, and love. The conclusion of the public discussion shows that this has not been a rabbinic discussion concerning the interpretation of law, but an authoritative teaching. See, this is important. I think I actually think this is the heart of the passage. Divorce is just the T on which all of this is placed. Question is, if I preach that way, is it going to blunt the effect of the discussion on divorce? And is it going to blunt the effect in general? Because it's going to be so broad. In the subsequent discussion with the disciples, Jesus declared without qualification that a man who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. The use of the word adultery directs the disciples back to the absolute command of God and clarifies the seriousness of the tone of the issue. The new element in this teaching, which was totally unrecognized in the rabbinic courts, was the concept of husband committing adultery against his former wife. The right of a wife to divorce her husband was not recognized by Jewish law, and even in Roman law was relatively recent development. Yeah, and we saw earlier that Pillar stated this might not be true. Wow. Man, the commentaries have a lot to say about this. I should be happy about it because it's a complicated topic, but it's a lot of reading. It's a bit overwhelming. I'd be curious what Calvin says. I haven't read Calvin's commentaries in a while. Here we go. The order of creation ought to serve for a law that the husband should maintain conjugal fidelity during the whole of life. Wow, this is interesting. The bond of marriage is more sacred than that which binds children to their parents, according to Jesus. It was much more sacred to Jesus than family. It's relevant. It's very relevant. It is uncertain whether Moses represents Adam or God as speaking these words, but it is of little consequence. Now he who marries his wife is not commanded absolutely to leave his father. When a comparison is made between the claims, the wife is preferred to father and mother. Calvin's very insightful. He's such a good writer. Even for his day. Like, he reads like a modern author in many ways. This expression, the two shall be one flesh, condemns polygamy. Whoever divorces his wife tears himself to pieces. So I need some application. Application. Those divorced before Christ. Those divorced after Christ. Those Christians considering divorce. Future spouses. Those are all legitimate applications. Good deal. Okay. Whoa. Trying to bring up the Twitch chat to make sure that everything's working well. Because I keep seeing people pop in and off Twitch, but let's go to my channel. If I see a bunch of chat in there, I'm going to be sad. Okay. Looks like I haven't had a ton of chat. Good deal. They thought of this calumny. If it were probable, Christ should demand a proper cause to be shown for the case of divorce, for it appears that whatever God permits by his law, whose will alone establishes the distinction between what is good and evil, is lawful. But Christ disarms the falsehood and slander by the appropriate reply. Moses permitted it on account of their obstinacy, not because he approved of it as lawful. Can Christians be hard-hearted as these Jews? Takes for granted when God first instituted marriage, he established perpetual law. It was rather a punishment inflicted on the husbands that indulgence or permission fitted to inflame their lust. Besides, political and outward order is widely different from spiritual government. The laws grant to us a greater liberty of litigation than the law of charity allows. The substance of it is this: though the law does not punish divorces, which are at variance with God's first institution, yet he is an adulterer who rejects his wife and takes another. But an exception is added, for the woman, by fornication, cuts herself off as a rotten member. When Paul mentions another reason, namely that when through a dislike of godliness wives happen to be rejected by unbelievers, a godly brother or sister is not in such a case liable to bondage. This is not inconsistent with Christ's meaning, for he does not there inquire as to the proper grounds of divorce, but only whether a woman continues to be bound to an unbelieving husband. After that, through hatred of God, she has been wickedly rejected and cannot be reconciled to him in any other way than by forsaking God, and therefore we need not wonder if Paul thinks it should be better she should part with a mortal man than that she should be at variance with God. As it was the duty of the husband to prosecute his wife for adultery in order to purge his house from infamy, Whatever might be the result, the husband who convicts his wife of uncleanness is here freed by Christ from the bond. It is even possible that among a corrupt and degenerate people, the crime remained to an extent unpunished. Therefore, when by committing adultery he has dissolved the marriage, the wife is set at liberty. Whoever shall marry her that is divorced. This clause, ill explained by many commentators. Celibacy is enjoined in all cases when a divorce has taken place. Looks to be a difference here between separation and divorce in verse 12. Let's check it out. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. He answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her, and if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. I don't know. That seems fairly forward. He's probably referring to the Matthew portion of the passage. This is clearly made out from the passage in Mark, where express mention is made of the wife who has left her husband, and if the wife shall divorce her husband. Not that wives were permitted to give their husbands a letter of divorcement unless... But Mark intended to show that our Lord condemned the corruption, which was at the time universal, that, after voluntary divorces, they entered on both sides into new marriages. Therefore, he makes no mention of adultery. Interesting. Man, there are a variety of interpretations on this passage. That is not helpful. There's going to be a lot of prep put into this one. A lot of prep. It's just it's a heavy topic, you know. That makes it difficult. Let's see, that was Calvin. Let's get something else a bit softer. Man, even these kind of softer commentaries have just loaded. Mark's readers know Pharisees are intent on destroying Jesus. They're putting him to the test. We already know that. Herod Antipas and Herodias, all the same. Instead of commenting on the law by debating the circumstances under which the husband might be permitted to divorce his wife, Jesus asks about what God intended in the creation. Essene law also appealed to Genesis to argue against divorce. Jesus does not deny that Moses established a procedure, but insists that its existence resulted from the hard-heartedness of humanity. Mark's readers know that the kingdom of God inaugurated by Jesus' ministry does not belong to the hard-hearted. See, this is important. Readers also know that Jesus opposed substituting human traditions for the commandment of God. The conclusion Jesus draws from the Genesis passage is consistent with the picture of Jesus and the law already presented in the gospel. Jesus sticks with what concerns disciples, God's intention in creating human beings. I think that's important as well. What is God's intention? That's what we should be asking ourselves when it comes to any issue, really. If one assumes the bond between husband and wife is permanent, she'd soon be committing bigamy. Given both the ease of divorce and the evidence that Jewish women also divorce their husbands, the variant probably reflects a scribe's attempt to fix Mark's text for a more Jewish reading. Mark 10:11-12 does not stipulate what the injured party should do once his or her spouse has remarried. Paul concluded that it would be in the spirit of Jesus' word on marriage for a Christian whose non-Christian spouse had divorced. In principle, Paul thought that Christians should not seek divorce. So these are other cross-references I need to reference. 1 Corinthians 7:15. We need to put all these together to formulate a consistent perspective on divorce. Because Mark doesn't ever say, except for the case of adultery, Matthew 19:3-9. Let's look at that real quick. Yeah, Matthew 19:9. How do we put all these together? to form a consistent perspective on divorce. Jesus wishes to insist that God's intention for human beings set forth in the Decalogue take priority over the other provisions of the Mosaic Law. Jesus does not intend to create new legislation. Christians have not been as adept as was their founder at avoiding the divorce business. Some have created an elaborate legal system for determining when a marriage may be declared void. Others are experimenting with ritualizing divorce. One can come away from this Markan story without the sense that Jesus would have declared both approaches attempts at human traditions. None of these programs can help those who fall in the category of hard-hearted. That's a really good point. Check this out. And then this is relevant too. Nice. Okay, this was a good one. Used a few commentaries tonight that I don't often use. Or let's continue that method. This is the heart of the passage, man. Let's see if we can't do this. Mark 10, 1 to 12. to call it no exceptions for right now. And what's the proposition going to be? Okay. Man, I don't know where to go with these ones. Hmm. One second, guys. All right, guys, I'm going to have to log off. Thanks for joining me tonight, and I will catch you later in the week. God bless. Take care. Bye now.